Okay, think back for a second. You remember seeing them, right? Someone just like hammering away on that little physical
Oh,
keyboard.
yeah, definitely.
Owning a BlackBerry, it was. It was a status symbol. You know, the secure email, that whole serious business vibe.
Totally. It felt very professional.
And it's kind of wild to think now, but back in 2010, they basically owned the U.S. smartphone market. We're talking over half of it.
Yeah, over 50%. It really shows you how fast things can change in tech. Dominance isn't always permanent.
Exactly. Which is why today, for the learner, we're doing a deep dive into the whole BlackBerry story. They sent over some really interesting sources.
Right, we're going to try and piece together that incredible rise, the really dramatic fall, and what they're trying to do now.
Yeah, we want to unpack those key moments, the big decisions, and figure out, what really happened and what lessons we can take away.
So we'll be looking at a few things. There's a detailed analysis called BlackBerry Limited One Acid,
Okay.
an Investopedia piece, BlackBerry, a story of constant success and failure. A really interesting Reddit thread called How and Why Did BlackBerry Collapse So Dramatically? You get some real user perspective there.
Oh, interesting.
And some strategic thinking from Insight in their article, The Real Lessons from the Fates of BlackBerry and Nokia.
Got it. So our mission here is really to get past just the timeline. We want to understand the critical factors behind it all.
Yeah, what drove their path?
Extract the lessons, not just for tech, really, but for any business dealing with rapid change, and maybe speculate a little on what their future might look like.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then, the rise. How did it all kick off?
Well, it starts as Research in Motion, or RIM, back
Yeah.
in 1984. And interestingly, they weren't really doing mobile phones at the start.
Oh, really?
No, it was founded by engineering students, Mike Lazaridis and Douglas Freegan. They were basically a consulting company, computers, electronics, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The big shift towards mobile communication, that really picked up steam when Jim Balsillie invested in 92. He got a big stake.
Right, I remember that name.
Yeah, and then they went public in 1997.
So what was their angle early on? What made them stand out?
Right from the start, their focus was user-friendly tech, but crucially also super secure and reliable, especially for corporate customers.
Ah, the security angle. That became their thing, didn't it?
Absolutely. That focus on really strong data security, it was a huge part of the BlackBerry brand identity.
Okay, so when did the actual devices we remember start appearing?
The big breakthroughs came a bit later. 1999, they launched the BlackBerry 850. Now, this wasn't quite a smartphone like we think of it now.
What was it then?
It was a two-way pager,
Right.
but the revolutionary part was push email, getting and sending emails on the go. That was huge.
The original push email. I remember that being a game changer.
Totally. Then, 2002, they brought out the BlackBerry 5810. That's pretty much seen as the first real smartphone.
And that one took off.
Oh, yeah. All the sources agree it was a massive hit. Sales went way up. Market share climbed really fast. Suddenly, having email anywhere wasn't science fiction.
It was real, and BlackBerry was leading it.
Exactly. And their position in the market, just before things got really competitive, it was impressive. By 2009, even with the global economy tanking,
Yeah.
they had the second largest smartphone OS market share globally. Only Symbian was bigger. They were a real force.
Wow. And financially, how
Yeah.
were they looking during that peak period, say 2006 to 2011?
Very strong. According to that ACCI case study, they had a low debt ratio, meaning they mostly owned their assets outright, financed through equity, not loans.
Mm-hmm.
That usually points to stability, good ability to repay any debts they did have.
Okay, stable.
Yeah. And their short-term solvency, their ability to pay immediate bills was also strong, though the study kind of hints they might have been sitting on a bit too much cash, maybe a little too cautious with investing it then.
But sales were booming.
Incredible growth. Almost 10 times increase in revenue in that window.
One time.
Yeah. And they were managing costs pretty well, too. So good net income, strong profitability, high returns for shareholders, high returns on their overall investments. They were making good money efficiently.
So healthy all around.
Definitely. And Investopedia really highlights that initial appeal, especially to business leaders, wealthy folks.
Right.
That active pager 950 back in 98, then the 850 pager in 99 with push email, instant hits.
So it started very corporate, very government focused.
Heavily, yeah. That fueled the early growth. But they did manage to break into the consumer market, too, later on. The Pearl, the Curve, the Bold series, those were popular.
Yeah, I remember the Bold. So they had it all, it seems. Cutting-edge tech for the time, market dominance, solid finances, a brand people recognized.
Looks like they were on top of the world.
But as we know, the story takes a very sharp turn. Let's get into the decline. Roughly 2011 to September 2013. This is where it gets fascinating and maybe a little painful.
Yeah, this is where the narrative shifts, and the central theme across all our sources really points to one major thing:
That's that.
a failure to really see the threat coming, or maybe to react effectively to it. We're talking about Apple's iPhone in 2007 and Android smartphones starting in 2008.
They just didn't see them as real competition.
It seems that way, at least initially. They didn't seem to grasp how disruptive these new platforms would be.
Looking back, that feels like a huge miss.
Yeah.
That Reddit thread you mentioned is probably full of people talking about the iPhone screen, right?
Oh, yeah. People vividly remember the touchscreen difference, the whole app ecosystem exploding on iPhone and Android.
And BlackBerry just didn't have that app store, did they?
Not in the same way, no. People started wanting more than just super efficient email and BBM.
BBM, BlackBerry Messenger. That was huge for them.
It was a key differentiator for a long time, but they seemed to rely on it too much. They didn't anticipate competitors like WhatsApp offering similar features, but crucially, across different operating systems.
Right. WhatsApp worked on iPhones, Androids.
Exactly, and often for free. That really undercut BBM's unique selling point over time.
And were they slow elsewhere, too? Like with new products?
Seems like it. The Playbook tablet is a good example. It came out a full year after the iPad. By then, Apple already had huge momentum. It felt late.
So this lack of adaptation,
Yeah.
it started hitting the bottom line.
Definitely. Around 2011, that incredible growth just stopped. Sales started falling sharply.
And the ACCD study talks about layoffs?
Yeah, rounds of layoffs in 2012, 2013. Key leaders left, like Lazaridis and Balsillie.
The founders, wow.
Well, Lazaridis was a founder, Balsillie, an early key executive and investor. Yeah. And ultimately, they reported a net loss in 2013. Things turned negative.
And the market share just evaporated.
It's stark when you look at the numbers. Their OS market share fell so much that after Q2 2013, analysts just lumped them into the others category.
Ouch, just others.
Yeah, it really shows how fast and how far they fell.
That Reddit thread, what else were people saying caused the collapse? Any other insights?
Some really good points. Lots of people mentioned the iPhone being, an iPod and a phone in one, a better all-around device for consumers.
Okay.
Some mentioned a feeling that the hardware quality maybe slipped a bit later on, maybe due to outsourcing. And a really key point that comes up is Apple targeting consumers from the get-go, whereas BlackBerry was so heavily focused on corporate clients initially.
So they missed the big consumer wave.
Arguably, yeah. They didn't pivot quickly enough to what the broader market wanted.
And wasn't there that story about RIM leadership dismissing the iPhone, calling it a toy?
Yeah, that comes up in the Reddit discussion, too. It really suggests they fundamentally misunderstood the shift happening and their own attempt at a touchscreen, the BlackBerry Storm.
Oh, the Storm, I remember that. It had that clicking screen.
Yeah, the Sure Press screen. It's often mentioned as, let's just say, not a successful response, a disappointment for many.
So things are looking pretty bleak. What happened next? Did they try to sell?
Well, yeah. Amidst all this chaos, August 2013, they announced they were looking at strategic alternatives, which often means, maybe selling.
Right.
And then in September, Fairfax Financial, a Canadian investment firm, made an offer to buy the company.
Okay, so a potential buyout. But the financials, were they completely shot?
That's where it gets interesting. The ACCI study points out something counterintuitive. While performance tanked in 2012 and 2013,
Yeah.
their equity-to-debt ratio actually improved.
How does that work?
It suggests they were possibly paying down debt or relying less on it relative to their equity. So even though profits vanished, there was maybe some underlying financial resilience or at least better management of their debt structure. And also, apparently, the Fairfax offer was actually lower than what the market thought BlackBerry was worth at that moment.
So maybe not the best deal on the table.
Potentially. And these factors likely influenced what happened next because they didn't end up selling the whole company.
Right. Which brings us to the next chapter, the revival attempt. Starting around October 2013, what happened instead of a sale?
So Fairfax Financial pivoted. Instead of buying them outright, they let a group investing $1 billion in cash into BlackBerry.
$1 billion. Okay, a lifeline.
A significant one. And with that came a new CEO, John Chen, in November 2013. The decision was clear. Try to turn things around, don't sell.
But that's a tough job, right? Rebuilding after falling so hard.
Incredibly tough. That ACCD study really stresses how hard it is to rebuild brand strength after such a rapid collapse. Public perception had really soured.
So what was John Chen's plan? What was the new strategy?
Initially, it seemed to be about stabilizing things, focusing on efficient management, trying to leverage the devices they still had alongside their strong enterprise services and software. They didn't just ditch phones immediately.
Did they launch new phones then?
And they did. There was the Passport, which had that weird square design aimed at professionals.
I remember that one.
And the Classic, which was meant to appeal to old-school BlackBerry fans, looked a bit like the Bold.
Bringing back the keyboard faithful.
Kind of. But the really big shift came in 2015. They launched the BlackBerry PV.
The pre-fee?
Yeah, their first phone running Android, not their own operating system.
Wow, okay. That's a major change.
Huge. It signaled they were really shifting focus towards secure mobile software, even if it ran on someone else's OS.
So leaning into their old strengths, but in a new way? Security, enterprise software.
Exactly. Their expertise in security, their enterprise software suite, their messaging systems, those became the core. They were still leaders in what's called enterprise mobility management, or EMM.
Managing fleets of phones for businesses.
Right. But the most definitive move was probably in 2016. They announced they were getting out of designing and making their own hardware altogether, outsourcing it.
So no more building BlackBerry phones themselves.
Nope. John Chen had that famous line, BlackBerry is no longer just about the smartphones, but the smart in the phone. Focus on the software, the security, the intelligence layer.
That's a fundamental pivot. How did that play out in the market share numbers? Did they just vanish from the phone stats?
Pretty much, yeah. By mid-2016, Android and iOS had basically captured the entire smartphone OS market, like over 99%.
Wow.
BlackBerry OS was in that tiny other slice. And same story for phone makers Samsung and Apple dominated. BlackBerry was a very, very small player in terms of units sold.
So survival meant becoming a different kind of company.
Yeah.
What did they see as key to making that work?
According to the ACCA study, they identified a few things. Forming strategic partnerships, making smart targeted acquisitions to build their software portfolio,
Okay.
expanding how they sold their software, getting really efficient operationally, and investing in talented people, especially on the software and security side.
And did that study recommend specific actions for the turnaround?
It did.
Yeah.
It strongly pushed for them to accelerate that shift away from hardware, even suggesting they might eventually just shut down that whole hardware unit.
Go all in on software and services.
Exactly. Cut operating costs significantly, grow the software side through acquisitions and partnerships, and use the cash they had smartly to fund this transition.
What did they think the outcome would be? Could they actually become profitable again this way?
The analysis suggested, yeah, potentially. Within a few years, by focusing on those higher margin software and services, they could get back to profitability.
Even if overall revenue dropped because they stopped selling phones.
Right. Because software generally has better profit margins than hardware. The idea was also that they could fund necessary investments using their existing cash, and key metrics like return on equity could improve.
And that insight piece about BlackBerry and Nokia.
Yeah.
What was the takeaway there?
It really just provided that broader context, didn't it? Highlighting how crucial constant reinvention and adaptation are, especially in tech. You just can't stand still.
Complacency is deadly.
Pretty much. BlackBerry and Nokia are kind of the classic cautionary tales about how hard it is to stay on top when disruptive innovation hits.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this all up. If you had to distill the key takeaways from this whole BlackBerry saga, what would they be?
Well, you see this arc, right? Initial dominance built on real innovation and knowing their niche secure mobile comms for pros.
Right, the email machine.
Exactly. Then, the critical failure. Not adapting quickly or effectively enough when the market shifted dramatically towards consumer-friendly ecosystems like iPhone and Android.
They missed the turn.
Big time. And finally, this ongoing massive strategic pivot, moving completely away from being a phone maker to being a software and security company. It's a story of adaptation, maybe late, but significant.
For the learner, I think the real aha moment, for me anyway, is seeing that interplay. You need the tech innovation, sure, but you also need that deep market understanding and, crucially, the right strategic decisions at the right time, especially when things are moving so fast. And it's also fascinating, isn't it? That contrast between how strong they looked financially right before the big decline started and how much trouble they had regaining consumer relevance later.
Yeah, that's a key point.
It really drives home that having money in the bank isn't enough if you're fundamentally out of step with where the market and your customers are heading.
Couldn't agree more. Financial strength doesn't guarantee survival if your strategy isn't agile or aligned with customer needs.
Okay, so let's leave our listener with something to think about. A final provocative thought.
Right.
Given BlackBerry's intense focus now on security, on enterprise software,
Hmm.
and living in a world where, let's face it, data privacy and cybersecurity are massive, growing concerns,
Huge issues, yeah.
could this pivot actually position them for a major comeback? Maybe not in the consumer phone space they once owned, but in a totally different arena. What new markets, what new applications could really tap into those core security strengths in a big way, even if we never see a BlackBerry phone dominating pockets again?
That's a really interesting question to ponder. Could security be their path back to prominence, just in a different form? Yeah.